Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast, and today I'm talking to Laura Ogilvie-Jones. She's an ICF PCC accredited career and leadership coach, qualified careers advisor, emotional intelligence assessor, and has done over 1,000 coaching hours. And the topic that we're going to explore together is something that she reached out to me and said that there's a theme that was coming through, and this really interested me. And it was about high performers in organizations basically secretly being less confident or quietly losing confidence. And we wanted to explore why that might be and also what HR could do to support people. In fact, HR could also be struggling with this. So we're really going to explore what happens with people when and how to spot if people are losing confidence. So Laura, over to you. Do feel free to introduce yourself a little bit further and then we'll sort of dig into the topic.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, Lucinda. And it's great to be on here. So career leadership coach, that's what I do. And I work with usually mid to senior level professionals. And I help them when they're kind of at a career crossroads. And that could be all sorts of things where they're just exactly the topic we're going to talk about, where they've lost confidence and they're not sure where they're going next. So I work one-to-one with people, or people having career changes, or maybe they're just kind of stuck in that leadership position, not sure where to go next. Again, might kind of be have had a bit of confidence wobble. So I will help them get unstuck, help them feel more fulfilled, help them feel more purposeful, and essentially happier in their careers and professionally. So yeah, and I work one-to-one with people, but I also work with groups as well and work with leadership teams, so with organizations.
Brilliant.
So that's my background.
No, it's lovely to have you on, and I'm just intrigued as to looking at this idea, what you're saying is this is a theme that's coming through more than it used to. You're seeing a predominance of people actually with a bit of a confidence slip. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's becoming more prevalent? And we talked it could be men and women. It's not just in one gender or one age group, but why are you seeing that?
Yeah, so I think that when people get to a certain kind of age and stage of life where they are at the top of their profession, they may well appear very confident externally, and there's that kind of pressure. And I think particularly with the prevalence of social media, that it's this kind of, Instagram, LinkedIn, professional image, and actually underneath they might be struggling and they might be, losing confidence and having wobbles, having doubts, but they don't feel able to verbalize that. And they don't feel that they're in a safe enough space to be able to do that. So that obviously will quietly erode the confidence, and they then don't have the space or capacity to kind of think and get that clarity and that reflection time, which then, that will cause them to really reconsider, are they in the right position? Should they be doing this? Maybe I need something else. And I think with the, the advance of technology and the speed at which everything is moving, there is particularly, trying to keep up with that when you're at a certain level. It can be quite hard, particularly when you've got kind of, a whole generation coming through the door who are, whiz kids and very fast at technology. That can be very unsettling. And also the advance of AI, I mean, again, talk about speed, trying to keep on top of all of that whilst also maintaining that kind of clarity that you need as a senior professional. It can be really tough, and people, but again, it's that kind of the lack of maybe space to have that kind of vulnerable, honest conversation about actually I'm really struggling I don't feel confident and I've got imposter syndrome. You know, a lot of people don't feel they're able to have those conversations or to air those views. So yeah, that's kind of I think maybe where it's
I
coming.
can see it, especially so where I don't know whether it was so common at a senior level. So I certainly remember imposter complex would be something that you feel initially you grow through, but it's almost like it's re-emerging for people because there's so much change around you, whether it's like say a new generation coming in, whether it's AI, which is changing everything for everybody. And it's just sort of quite challenging to feel, do I actually know what's there? But I think also I think about your point about social media. I actually think that is really relevant because everybody's become better at presenting themselves, or a lot of people have become better at presenting themselves, at marketing on LinkedIn. And you can say something and you think, wow, they sound really impressive. You know, think your bio, right? We just start, wow, she sounds really impressive. You know, and it's really easy to think, oh, I haven't got that. To downplay your own skills and sort of think that I couldn't do that when actually you probably could. But if you're in an environment where you're just working with other people and they you kind of using your skills and they know what you're capable of, as opposed to seeing a shop window of what's having to present it in a shiny way, it's different. And there's a lot of kind of superficial stuff. I mean, it's interesting. I often put stuff out on LinkedIn. People go, "Oh, that sounds really amazing." I'm going, yeah, sorry, it is marketing BS. You've got to do that in order to be presented. So there's a lot of that out there, isn't there, in terms of things. And actually, it's about how do you get to being real with people.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the word I often use with my clients and talk about is comparativitis, and it's a completely made up term. But it is. I mean, we are
Yeah.
absolutely bombarded with images, news, communication about other people and what they're doing and how amazing they are and how amazing their careers are, and professionally they're top of their game. You know, whereas I think historically we weren't bombarded to the same extent. You know, you kind of were in your lane at your organization, you maybe knew about some of your competitors, but you certainly weren't bombarded in the way that we are now. So I do think it is much more prevalent.
And your validation was based on kind of real stuff that you'd done and by the people you were working with, as opposed to what you're presenting as your sort of your pitch, your value proposition. Yeah, so it's much more tangible based based on the piece of work you did last, or someone you've worked with, a coaching client that you worked with last, as opposed to this sort of something that's polished and over presented. So it's kind of cutting through that, but I can see why that is the case. And then also, you said it's men and women, but it's also women at certain stages of life. We know there'll be hormonal impact on people where you might be more likely to feel anxious, but you're saying it's definitely something that affects blokes as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I work with a lot of men, and they often struggle, I would say, more to be really honest, sometimes even
To
honest
admit it.
themselves. Sometimes when I am working with, someone one to one, it's the first time they've ever actually been honest, vulnerable, and authentic about what is actually going on and how they're actually feeling. I mean, the fact sometimes that they've even reached out for help in some capacity, but it's interesting how it presents itself. So how they might come to me and say, right, I would like some leadership coaching because I want to improve this, this, and this. And actually, it doesn't take a lot to chip below the surface to see that this, the pressure that they're feeling, the responsibility, the kind of expectations, and how that has just completely crowded out their bandwidth. And they just don't feel, and with that, the confidence has been eroded.
So I won't go into the bandwidth at the moment. The confidence thing is interesting. So you obviously get below the surface. And I'm thinking for people out there, loads of people who are listening to this thinking, I don't know if that's me, it might not be me. What question would you ask that, or how do you get to that point where even if they've buried it, they acknowledge it? How do you help people to recognize that that's an issue?
So as a coach, and I know that obviously in the coaching world, there's lots of different versions of coaching. I'm an ICF coach. They are very strict around what coaching is and what it isn't. We don't veer into mentoring or consulting. I don't give advice. So it's very much about partnering with people, walking alongside them. And the idea is that the person you're working with is creative, resourceful, and whole. They're not broken. They don't need to be fixed, essentially. You're their thinking partner and you're helping them, you're challenging them as well. But I think that's a real key differentiator. So when I'm asking questions, the questions that I'm asking are to help them understand themselves better, to maybe reframe the way they're thinking about things, to see things in a different light. So I may well, they might be talking about something and I might notice that their body language is not matching what they're saying. So I might highlight that. Or they might present something as fact and I might just say, how true is that? Or maybe, I don't know, that they're say, I'm trying to think about other questions, but there'll be sort of coaching style questions, which are, it's not, so it's just.
So you notice an incongruity in terms of something,
Exactly.
and you'll ask a question, and then that'll maybe go, oh, and then that helps them maybe see it, lift it to the surface.
Yes. Exactly. And just, it is definitely getting below the surface. But obviously, when you start working with someone, again, the barriers are often up, this kind of, again, even with me, when they're working with me, but I've got to present that I'm this kind of highly skilled, efficient, effective leader, at top of my game. And actually, obviously, when we're working together, the big thing is from the start, we will set a kind of goal, and I call it their North Arrow. And it is not measurable. So unlike in the workplace where you're being driven by KPIs and numbers and targets, when we're working together, it's much more emotive. It's much more values led, as in, it's about really the core essence of who they are. Who do they really want to be when they are thriving in the workplace, when they are the best version of themselves as that leader, as that senior professional? What does that feel like? And so just getting to that point, even that conversation it will break below the surface, and be like, and sometimes actually emotions come up, because it's like,
you're saying feelings. I just think that's a really, I mean, it's almost like you've said to listeners, say, what does it feel like to do your job? Or how do you feel about that feeling? Because a lot of the time, if you are stressed, you're operating up here, aren't you? We're keeping, you're pushing emotions down and you're operating up here, that breathing out the top of your chest. And that's suddenly, if you go to feelings, if you are emotional about something, someone sort of taps in and go, oh, how you feel about that? You go, oh, not sure if I want to talk about feelings. So it kind of bubbles up. So it's an interesting way.
Yeah. And I think as well, and I'm not saying this that, in terms of, I think females, again, are generally a little bit more okay with talking about feelings at times. Not all females, obviously, there are some not. But I think, again, for a lot of males I'm working, particularly at a very senior level, even when I do that sort of exercise in the first session where we're thinking about their North Arrow and getting clear about that, what is that sort of values-driven best version of you? They've never ever thought about that before. Because often in the kind of professional world, you are measured by your numbers, by your your success is very numbers driven, be that financial,
tangible,
tangible, exactly. Whereas we're coming at this from a completely different angle, and it is much deeper, but it is therefore much more effective because we're getting underneath, we're getting below the surface of all of this and what is actually going on. Why is their confidence eroded? Why are they feeling that imposter syndrome? What's happened in those conversations or whatever it might be that's come up for them, which is, why we're working together in the first place.
So just going back again on that North Arrow thing, so I was just to, because I quite like, is that a kind of purpose thing, or is it about what their values, or is this about understanding where it's disconnected with where they are now? How does that work, that way in which you sort of start them thinking differently?
So, well, before we actually do the North Arrow, what I do is I will use a whole load of versions of Wheels of Life, which you may well have come across, where they're kind of, and so often for leaders and professionals, I have a Wheel of Leadership, which is just where they kind of rate themselves 0 to 10 out of lots of different components of aspects of being a leader.
Leadership, right? Exactly. So you've got different versions of those sort of, let's say 8, a slice. In case someone doesn't know, so like a cake with 8 slices in with different things, and you go, where am I and where do I want to be, or just rank yourself. If you said the outside is perfect, you rank where you are in terms of satisfaction.
Yes, exactly. It's in terms of satisfaction or fulfillment in that particular part of say, as a leader, the different aspects and components of being a leader, and you rank yourself in those different aspects. And then that gives us and certainly they get a lot of light bulb moments in that. Okay, what is actually going on here in terms of, okay, so you said 2 out of 10 for relationships in terms of a leader. What does a 2 out of 10 mean to you in terms of relationships? And again, some of those conversations, then you talk about, well, what would a 10 out of 10 feel like then if it's a 2 out of 10 right now? So just trying to get them to think about, with a bit more detail and depth where they are right now. And then once we've kind of done that and they've got a lot more clarity around that, then I do a little visualization, which I don't know if you've done before, but they use visualizations lots in the sporting world where they'll get players to imagine the end result of a match. It's very similar, but I just get them to think about them, their career and their life more widely in a year's time. And that is always fascinating. What comes out of that is usually never what they expect. It's not them in a boardroom, never is. The best version of them in a year's time when they are feeling absolutely brilliant in all parts of their career and their life is often, in a much more relaxed environment. Sometimes it's kind of them at home, them with their family, with their friends, or
on top of work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then from that, we then draw out and extrapolate all the different aspects of the best version of them. Like, what is the core essence of you in that moment in time then that's feeling fantastic, that is thriving in the workplace? So it will be more emotive, like I want to feel, and usually it's, things around feeling confident, feeling fulfilled, feeling happy, content, so it's much more emotive. Then we figure out, once we've got that clarity around, okay, so that is the best version of you when you're feeling all those feelings and you in yourself feeling great. Well, how are we going to get you there? What is actually what's getting in your way at the moment? Exactly. What do you need to address? What do you want to change? What do you want to start to look into something new that's going to nudge you a bit closer to that? And that then becomes the focus. And that works really well rather than a measurable goal around salary, KPIs, which is kind of what they come from in the workplace. It's our emphasis is quite different, but it works.
Yeah, I can see that, and it's quite inspiring. So I suppose so that's almost how you can help people, but we've got to identify people in the first place, and our audience here is HR. How might you spot somebody in the workplace who could be struggling?
Yeah, so I would say it would be someone who has maybe been confident and they start to hesitate a bit. So they start to withdraw, maybe they go into kind of overthinking mode, or they start questioning themselves, start second guessing. Again, I think the withdrawing from opportunities even. So something comes up and they're not putting themselves forward. They're not kind of maybe as driven as they were before. And they're just someone who's maybe lost their energy, lost their mojo and that spark. And or feel stuck, like, oh, I don't know what to do about this situation. It's those kind of signs of someone who is wavering in some way, particularly when it's a behavior change, from someone who has been a real go-getter, outwardly confident, to having a bit of a wobble, but maybe that's been a bit of a sustained wobble as well.
And what would you recommend someone did to kind of, I don't know, to get them to talk about it, or if they're in an HR role, how do you recommend them engaging?
It probably just giving them a bit of space and time, giving them a sort of safe space. I know one of your previous lists talked about that kind of psychological safety, but it is that it's okay, helping them in some way to have that kind of reflection time, space to think, talk, be vulnerable. And also kind of just maybe reconnect with values, what's important to them, what was important to them when they joined, what's, maybe what's misaligned now, what's changed, just opening up, really, giving them support essentially, rather than pressure, piling the pressure on, oh, well, you need to do this, or send them off on some leadership training or more of this, more of that.
It's more surface as opposed to them.
It's just,
I mean, it's a good valuable, but it makes a difference. Having what's going on underneath is going to make a difference.
Absolutely, it is, and it's just giving them that space and bandwidth to be able to get some clarity, when they're feeling like that.
So if I'm an HR person, and let's say, obviously the ideal world would be to get, you can see someone needs support, they maybe even agree that they do. the ideal world would be to send them off one-to-one coaching, but obviously that's quite an investment in time and money for people on one-to-one. Are there any other things that you could do? I mean, you do group things. Are there any, and some of the tools you talked about, the wheels, and are there any sort of self-help or little tools that you could bring into the organization that might be useful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, the wheels are actually a great tool, because that's, again, it's a sort of self-reflection piece. I sometimes get people to do what I call a buzz sheet, which sounds slightly random. It's definitely thinking outside the box. It's kind of big picture thinking, but I get someone sometimes when they really have lost their mojo and their spark and it's eroding their confidence, it's basically, I say, kind of get a big piece of paper, maybe a whole load of Sharpies, and just write down everything in this last week, or everything you can think about that sparks you up, that lights you up, that has, made you feel a bit joyful, enthusiastic, passionate, driven. It might be certain people that you've had interaction with, it might be certain projects, it might be tasks you've done, it could be absolutely anything. It could be stuff outside the workplace actually as well. Particularly if people are really struggling in the day-to-day, it's like, well, what were you doing at the weekend that you absolutely loved? And just get all that down. It doesn't have to make sense. It's just focusing on that kind of spark, that energy, that passion, that drive, to get them to reconnect with that. And then what I get them to do is or I suggest to them, because you don't tell what people want to do in your coaching, say, right, take every night now for a week, when you come back from work, add to that from just thinking about the day you've just had. So again, think about all the different people you've interacted with, projects you've done, tasks you've done, or whatever it might be. Jot those down as well and keep adding to it every night for a week. And what they start to see is some very clear patterns coming up about the types of people who are giving them energy and spark and enthusiasm and passion, the types of projects, the types of tasks, maybe things outside of work. And that's then when they can start to maybe draw some parallels, think, okay, so if I can do more of this, that is going to help me move out of the situation that I'm feeling right now. So that can be quite, I mean, it has to be a certain person. There are certain people that I probably wouldn't suggest doing that to. But I think someone who is really stuck and in that, I'm just going to try anything, it can be a really nice way, which is it's not measurable in a kind of traditional success kind of way. This is much more personal, much more about, and the other thing is I have values exercise that I will do with people too, to get them to, again, focus on what's important. And there's plenty of those online that you can find as well. They're just a couple of things that
that's good. And the buzz one, I can see how it's almost a little bit like gratitude, isn't it? It's a bit about things that you're getting people to focus on some of the positives, and then you're seeing patterns in the positives as opposed to the stuff that's not been positive. And the more you look for, the more you might get, I guess. And values, of course, is a great one, because that is kind of akin to if you were doing a values workshop for a business. So that can really fit in a business, doing our individual values and then our team value. You can broaden that out, and it can feel quite business focused as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I also I love the work of Brené Brown and her leadership work. I don't know, I presume that you are aware of her.
What do you like particularly?
The fact that she is just so well, obviously that she's worked with some of the biggest top organizations in the world and top leaders in the world, and she is not afraid to address head on vulnerability and shame and courage as a leader, and actually those being qualities that make the best leaders, and giving you tools and a kind of way of being authentic, I think, to yourself as well, in terms of leadership. So she obviously has books. There's a book called Dare to Lead. Her latest one is Strong Ground, which is built on that. That's a fantastic book. And there's loads of podcasts. She's got her TED Talks as well. But one of the exercises, which can be really interesting, is, and again, this can be quite interesting because for HR, in terms of thinking about communication, when someone is, it's called Above the Line, Below the Line, and it's basically for leaders to really reflect on what is going on when they communicate with someone, or that an interaction doesn't go so well. And it can be a really good self-reflection tool as well, is that, and she uses some great examples herself where something went wrong, and she went straight to below the line, which is where you're operating from that fear place. And again, this kind of, so your interactions then might be quite accusatory, you might be quite aggressive, you're just not kind of coming from the best place, in terms
So
of
below the line is negative, and
exactly.
above the line is
So,
positive.
yeah, so above the line is much more, it's where you still, it's not about, obviously stuff happens, things go wrong, but it's when you come from a place of much more reflective, okay, I hear you, this has not worked out well, this is not going, to plan. However, I'm just going to take a breather, I'm going to have some space, I'm going to think about this, and then I'm going to come back and address it. So you're still addressing situations and problems and people head on. It's just the place that you're coming from emotionally is different. And that, again, when someone, and sometimes you can see that in behaviors that have changed with a senior professional, and when maybe they are being quite defensive or maybe a bit more aggressive than usual, is actually that can be a really great tool and framework to help them understand what is actually going on, why they might be like that, but also what they want to do, how they can change it as well.
What's getting them to behave that way. It is interesting, the whole concept of just that self-awareness, because the being tough is often really counterproductive for people in terms of employee engagement, just in terms of you connect with someone who is that humility, the Brené Brown stuff, the whole thing about if you've got a leader who actually can demonstrate humility and vulnerability, it's not a sign of weakness, it's actually a sign of strength. And that's a really interesting thing for people to get their heads around, if they are kind of going to be able to admit to having feelings and working it through. And it's certainly something that, it's having a safe space and people to be able to, it's definitely a more mature place, but it's not necessarily the most sort of comfortable place for many people in terms of showing that vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then of course the other thing is that I think you mentioned before, I'm an emotional intelligence assessor. So I'm trained in what's called the EQI 2.0. So I will often work with senior leaders and they will, we'll get a kind of profile for them in terms of their emotional intelligence. And that's fascinating because it breaks their emotional intelligence into 15 strands. It's not a psychometric tool or a personality test. So it's very different from something like Insights or MBTI.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about developing and strengthening their emotional intelligence. So again, just like you've said, it helps them get that extra level of self-awareness. So why do I behave in that situation like that? And what's pushed my buttons? And why does that person make me feel like that? And then actually it's all about developing and strengthening that. Because once you have that knowledge and that understanding, and you know more about yourself, you can do something about it. Because obviously if you don't have that self-awareness, you're just, blissfully carrying on.
Yes, it's so funny you mentioned that, because the model version of that tool, I'd say probably 15-20 years ago, I remember working with a group of sales managers, and there's one particularly very high IQ manager, but considered that his IQ was the same as EQ. And we did one of my colleagues was qualified and it would have been a precursor to the one you're talking about, but did this EQ thing, and he came down, as having, I think, low intra, I can't remember what the dimensions were, but low intrapersonal EQ, in terms of didn't really know himself. And he was fuming. He was not willing to accept that, but couldn't see the irony that was kind of proving the point. So he was, and if I think about that, it would be very interesting, because he would be very up there, sort of apparently ego-driven leadership, and quite hard to connect with and to follow. Actually, he was one of the reasons I left that business, actually. But because he came in and was very autocratic. But actually, the thing that he shouldn't have seen it is because it wasn't an IQ test, because as I understand it, it is something you can develop if you want to, right? You can develop that self-worth, you can develop your EQ. It's not something that's fixed.
No, it's not. The whole point with the assessment that they do is that in 6 months' time, if they were to retake that assessment, their scores would be different because they have strengthened and developed it. So it is a developmental tool.
Yes.
Because obviously the happiest, most successful leaders have a very high EQ, regardless of
and then make people happy to follow them. But you've got to have that growth mindset, which we won't go to there, to start it in the first place. A bit cyclical. Oh, I think it's a really interesting topic, Laura, and I love the fact that you've brought some real practical examples that people could take away, and little exercises that people could do if they were trying to just work within their teams or within their organizations. We've talked about how to spot if people are dipping down, and maybe just ask a few of those questions below the surface. How are people feeling? That sort of thing, creating that space for reflection, because it's definitely hard to do that. And there's no doubt there are so many circumstances right now, from AI to fast moving to social media, to make us feel that many more of us, it's normal. Anyone listening, I've done, and right now I've started going out for, looking to slightly different work to what I've done for ages, and I feel that kind of, oh, can I still do that? I think it's really normal. There's lots of it around. So if anyone wanted to work with you directly or wanted to get hold of you, I know you live in Edinburgh, but that doesn't matter because you work virtually and otherwise. How would they get hold of you, Laura?
Yeah, so my website, which is lojcoaching.com, and that's where there's lots of information about how I work with individuals and how I work with organizations there. So just fill in an inquiry form, we'd set up a discovery call, and we'd go from there. So I do work with organizations. So for example, at the moment I'm working with an organization that's a fintech organization that's actually about to be swallowed up by one of the big financial institutions, and I'm working with their whole leadership team and various other members of the team on all sorts of professional aspects, a lot of them around leadership, but also a lot under the umbrella of change, essentially. And a lot of them having wobbles in terms of confidence within
Definitely,
that.
if you're being swallowed up into another business, you can totally see that, can't you?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. So lots of different ways.
We'll tell your links in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the HR Uprising podcast.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucinda.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now, you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.